Chiefs hitting out some awards, and it has a bearing on free agency and what they do next. We're breaking it all down today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back in, everybody. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel customers, new ones, can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's that simple. Go check it out at FanDuel. We're going to check out the Chiefs season awards came out, two in particular that had some impact, as well as what's going to go on with free agency. We're going to hit a little free agency hot or cold later in the show. We'll talk about Joe Thuney and his future, exactly what it has on an impact for this team coming up in the next segment. We're going to start with the awards. This is Chris Clark from KC Chiefs Corner. Go check that out. I'm Ryan Tracy from NFL33.com and RGRfootball.com and the Rogue Performance Consulting. You can go get the Athletic Matrix coming out here as we get to Combine Week. We'll have more about that coming up. But if you want that and that much more, you can get emerging news and all kinds of backfill on our text line at 816-357-8781. Story of the weekend, really with all the hubbub about the way they went about the left tackle position down the stretch, it doesn't make too much surprise, right, that Joe Thuney was voted the MVP of this team this year by his teammates. That's fairly significant because, especially playing out of position in the way that he had to go through it, you can't really ask for much more from Joe Thuney as a left guard bumping out there. It's a difficult situation to be in, but didn't catch me by surprise. Do you think there's anybody more deserving, or is Joe the right guy?
No, I think he's the right guy. I think that they obviously really love what he brings to this team, and he is a jack of all trades, I guess you could say, because I'm guessing he could also play center, and obviously if you can play left tackle, you can probably play right tackle, and I would imagine that right guard isn't going to be an issue either. So, but the crux of this matter is, and why this is such a big deal is, stop me if you haven't heard this before, but he's got a $27 million cap hit in 2020.
Yeah.
5. That is going to play into all of this. And we're going to talk a lot more about Thuney in the next segment. But the whole reason I bring that up is because it is going to play into how all of this comes about for this roster. But it also looks at it as a situation where he is the MVP. He is what they say is the most valuable player. And yet his cap number is unsustainable in 2025. So they have to do something. It's going to be a question of what they do. But it does play into the fact that he wins the MVP and this is his cap number. So that would make you think that they're going to try to make something work and find something to work.
Yeah. I mean, and we're going to go down the options in the next segment, but I'll just say this as an overview. It's rare that you get to the final year of a contract and you still feel like, hey, this was top of the market at one point for his position, and yet you're still getting the value. After his performance this year, I don't think there's any argument, right?
There's not. But they've stolen money from his contract. Like, they've pushed money forward. So it's a matter of renegotiating, or it's a matter of proration on his deal. His deal originally was something around $20 million for a cap number, but they needed the cap space a couple of years ago and they restructured it. And now you're dealing with that additional cap space issue. And so while it was a good deal at the time, it's one of those things where you look at it now and it's like, okay, well, more than likely there's no way he can play on that. And we'll talk about that again in the next segment, because it is really a gateway to how this entire offseason is going to go. But the whole point is the team thought he was important enough to give him the MVP. Mm-hmm. And while $27 million isn't the highest cap number, it is by far the largest for an offensive lineman on this roster.
And that's saying something right there.
I say that, and now that I think about that, no, it's not. It's just behind Juwan Taylor. I apologize. Juwan Taylor originally was below Thuney as well, but restructure again and above by about $400,000. So
that's a good point, though, because that kind of makes my point too. That despite all that, just looking at the raw numbers and how much he's been paid for, how much he's performed, he's still a value over what we're getting from Juwan Taylor, at least in my approximation for his grade on the field for those dollars. So that goes a long way, and he should be the MVP. I think that was the right decision. As far as Rookie of the Year goes, Xavier Worthy got put in as bad a position as Rashee Rice did, and I think performed admirably, if not better than Rashee Rice. Was a little bit more delayed, had obviously a different path to get there, but clearly in the postseason was the guy that they had to rely on. I don't think there's any question, nothing against Jaden Hicks or anybody else that put in time. Xavier was the only option for that award.
I would agree, and I think that you would wish that there was some more competition, because that would mean that your draft class was a little bit more well-balanced, but that's not the case. The one thing I will say is I would almost argue that Worthy was in a worse position than Rashee Rice, because I don't think Worthy was looked at as being a starter. I think Rice was looked at as being a potential starter last year when he came in. I don't think that they were looking at Worthy as being a top 2 wide receiver.
Right.
I think they looked at Worthy as being a number 3 and maybe even a number 4 for the first part of the season. And I understand Rice didn't start early on in the season last year. I get that. But I do think that that was the thought process, is that they would use him in that role, while Worthy was going to be basically behind Hollywood Brown and learning that position and learning that skill set and trying to learn as much as he could behind him, and not necessarily be a guy that replaces Brown and just replaces Brown, but be able to do a lot of what Brown does and be able to stretch the field. And it changed because of injuries.
Yeah, it certainly did. But kudos to him for accelerating. It gives you a 1-2 punch for the future. And I think that giving him that award, I think the team's dead on. And nobody knows that team like the guys inside the locker room. So it's not like I could argue with it anyway. But confirmation from the outside looking in, you definitely had the biggest impact of the rookie class. And that just puts more pressure for what happens next season. They have a couple of things they have to fix, but
And thank you, Buffalo.
yeah, hey, you're welcome again. Folks, check out the RGR store very, very soon. I have some new stuff coming, and I think you'll enjoy that joke. He's only part of the equation here, and we need to do a deeper dive on Joe and his options and what the ramifications are of all these scenarios. In terms of, we've talked about Kelce, but Joe's maybe the second biggest domino that has to fall. So we're going to get to that coming up next. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get into it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place your live bets throughout the game, start to finish. Even if you missed the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can get there. You can stay in the action. And if you want to go looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into same-game parlay. You got to love that because it's a new aspect. You can just roll it into it. If you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking up a player who just hit a 3 and you think he's getting really, really hot, you can do that in the app, and it makes it super easy. Right now, our new FanDuel customers are getting $150 in bonus bets if you first get a $5 bet that wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets right now. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the NBA. Now, if you would, check out NFL33.com as well as RGRFootball.com and get the other content. We have tons more coming for you on the Substacks from both of us, and a lot goes into all this work in the offseason because there's just too many things to look at. But we are Chiefs focused, and we will remain that on the show 5 days a week, all the time. Don't you worry. Dominoes have to fall. We've talked about Kelce. Some rumors floating around about Travis Kelce right now. We'll get to those later in the week. We're going to talk about Joe Thuney and what his impact is on the plan for the offseason. We're going to give you more about Joe Thuney and a group of 4 other players on this Chiefs roster tomorrow, so don't miss that one as well. But Joe's in a unique position. Coming into this season, he had sustained a torn pec, didn't go to camp, didn't participate. Like, I was questioning whether he'd even be able to go by the first quarter of the season. And yet, as it all comes around, not only does he fill in a critical role when they had to have him, but he gets this MVP award. Like you said in the last talk, they have to go after this. That indicates that giving him that, they have to try to bring him back in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what the numbers will look like, but that's the goal, isn't it?
I would think it has to be. The question is how they're going to get it done. And obviously you can't pay him. And to be clear, that's the other thing about this with Joe. He's got nothing left guaranteed on his salary. Everything is just base salary and nothing guaranteed. So he literally has a base salary of $15.5 million and a workout bonus of $500,000. So $16 million is really his cash. Mm-hmm. To be clear, that's the cash cost of having him on the roster. The cap cost is $11 million higher, and that's because his salary cap bonus proration, and that is the big issue. So they could pay him 16 and they feel very good about paying him 16. Cash wise, they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of what are you going to do with the cap number, because that has to be addressed.
So there's a couple of options there, right? There's not much, I think, to restructure here that you can get a few million back, but I don't know the ramifications of it. No, you can't get anything at this point.
Well, this is the last year on this deal. So if you restructure, the only thing you could do is add void years.
Gotcha.
So yes, you could. I don't think that they're going to.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and that's not generally the way that the Chiefs have done things, so I can't imagine that's what they're going to do. But, either way, if Kelce retires, that's $20 million. Maybe you have him play on this deal at that point. Mm-hmm. If Kelce doesn't retire, then you need to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to get it under the salary cap, because you can't do $27 million. And, the caveat with all of this is, what does Joe want? Like, we haven't talked about that part of it. Right. Winning an MVP from your team outside of winning the Super Bowl is about the biggest thing that you could probably get as a player, because I guarantee you, obviously a Super Bowl means the most to these guys. They don't really care about individual awards when it comes to writers and people like that give out those individual rewards.
Right.
Or awards, but I guarantee you they care about what their teammates say. So
there's something to be an all-pro.
That.
But yeah, that's another form of recognition from around the league, right?
Right. But to me, that's what this comes down to: is what does Joe want? Does Joe want to keep playing? Like, he's obviously good enough to continue playing for the next couple of seasons if he wants to. He could play next year, and even if he took a 5 or 10% step back, he's still above average. Because right now, he's still way above average right now, and I don't know even where I'd rank him. He's easily a top 3 guard, I would think, this year. And if that's truly the case, taking a 5 to 10% step back with age in the next couple of seasons is still doable and still worth paying the money. So I don't know what you do. I think you got to know what Joe wants to do. Because that's the other thing. If he wants to play, how long does he want to play? Does he have an idea how long he wants to play? Because that's the other issue. If he wants to play another 2 or 3 years, maybe you give him a 2 or 3 year extension. Then you can drop his cap number way down. But
and that's one of the options, right? You can do an extension, adding new years to this deal, spreads the money out more, right? You could they could agree to rip up this contract, void out the last year, and put a new deal in place if they want to. That has happened before. I just don't know what the financial ramifications are.
Well, financially, they're still on the hook for $11 million. So they can't get out of that regardless. Almost $11 million. And that's salary cap bonus proration from his original deal and from a restructure, I believe. So, yeah, it looks like they restructured him probably in 22, I think. So that's an option. They can definitely do that. They could give him a 3-year extension, and I think that would make a lot of sense. And you can probably get his number down to maybe 15 or 16 million, but you're still going to be up over 11 because you have 11 that is coming from this current year. So there's no real way to get out of that. The other option, and you can't, I was going to say there's another option, but you can't even do that, because the other option I was going to say, which I don't think the team would want to do anyway, is to cut him and spread it over 2 years. But you can't do that either because he doesn't have the 2 years to spread it on. Right. So you're stuck with this 11 million regardless at this point. They're not going to just cut him. I can't see that happening. If he wants to retire, he wants to retire, and you have nothing you can do with the 11 million. Now the 11 million would save you 16 if he retires. So there is a cap savings there. And same with if you cut him, you still have the 11, but you save 16. I just can't see them cutting him after making him MVP.
You could do a 1 or 2 year extension too, right? With minimal dollars added, dropping his base. And obviously the proration you can't do anything about except spread it out. But that could get the cap number down. That is the definition of a team-friendly deal, though. And maybe, as you said, maybe he only wants to play another season. Who knows? I think it's very interesting how Travis Kelce's stardom has everybody speculating about his retirement decision, and yet no one's talking about Joe's decision. Maybe that's because the team just feels he's not going to do it. He's happy to play again. Who knows?
It could be that, but it could also just be the simple fact that Travis Kelce is a much more flamboyant character, I guess you could say. And there's a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen with his career after football. Whereas Joe Thuney, I don't think really has. I mean, Travis is going to go on and do Saturday Night Live. He's got his podcast. He's got, he's dating Taylor Swift. I mean, there's lots of different things you can talk about with Travis Kelce. And that's one of the reasons why people are talking about him and not Joe, even though Joe is probably, I don't want to say better player, but you could almost argue better player at his position.
He played a third of the season out of position and still made All-Pro. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Now, replacing somebody like, should he decide to retire, it makes the whole offseason that much harder. So I'm going to stay positive. Joe Thuney's going to be in uniform. Maybe not in camp, but week 1. That's the attitude I'm going to take going forward until I hear otherwise. So it's the guy to his left that we have to worry about the most. We're going to talk about the tackles tomorrow, but there's a whole giant group of free agents out there. Some of them might be fixes. Some of them might not. But who looks attractive? We're going to do hot or cold free agency here coming up next. Folks, make sure, if you want any of the gear, the hat that I'm wearing and everything is available at the RGR store. If you want to go check that out, super simple search, or you can go over to rgrfootball.com and you can find it there in any of the video titles. Make sure you make another Locked On show your next listen. We appreciate you. Get on the text line at 816-357-8781. I really appreciate everybody's involvement and enthusiasm for the offseason. I know it's a bad way to start it with the Super Bowl loss, but another year, another 53 is coming. And I wish we had one of those electronic just spin the dial so I could put some names on a board and see who came up. But I think we're just going to have to suffice with looking at the free agent list unless you have a better way to do this.
No, and that's fine. I will say this, though. Don't get me wrong, the Super Bowl lost things and it hurts. But there's a small part of me, and it is small, that wishes that they would have lost in maybe the AFC Championship game, simply because you look at all the energy spent for the Super Bowl. You look at everything going up to the Super Bowl. The experience is great. I get it. But this team needs a break. And losing the Super Bowl, you're not getting that break.
It kind of sucks. I'm with you. That would build that in. But this is the story of this team and all these games that they play. I have no expectation that that's going to change anytime soon. Despite us having to have maybe one of the more robust off seasons that we've seen in quite a while, I do still believe that this roster and its core has the ability to get back to that Super Bowl yet again. So we'll deal with that next season when anything happens. So I'm looking at the free agency list. We did this last week a little bit, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper because I had a couple of thoughts over the weekend. I think they should be concentrating on young guys in particular, guys that maybe bring something to the roster that they haven't had in the past. And I'm not 100% sold on Carson Wentz's future with this team. I don't know that there's going to be a big contract banging down his door, but I know that he wants to be a starter in this league again. So he might hold out for that. I'm not sure if he returns on a backup contract. So one name that stood out to me when I looked down the list earlier is Trey Lance, a kid that never had a chance to develop. He's been stuck behind what I think is a system in Dallas that doesn't develop quarterbacks very well. I don't think he's had a chance to flourish. He brings something to this roster that I feel is akin to Chris Ludicon and might be somebody that now, as Patrick hits 29, 30 years old, maybe you don't need the vested veteran behind you all the time. Maybe you can go with somebody that, should Patrick have to miss a game or two, gives you another dimension physically and maybe could grow into this offense. What do you think of Trey Lance, hot or cold?
It's so tough. It's tough because you look at what he's brought so far, and it's been almost nothing. And the reality is that you're going to be looking at this roster going, if Mahomes gets hurt, can he win a game? Can he win a playoff game? Can he help them get to the Super Bowl next year? I haven't seen that from Trey Lance. Is it possible he can? Yeah, right. Is it possible it can? Yeah, sure, it's possible. But I haven't seen it. And granted, you didn't really see it from Carson Wentz too much, but he has shown he has shown the ability in the past to at least be effective as a starter, as a everyday starter. So there's that. So the question is does Andy Reid go away from having a veteran quarterback? I don't think so. I'm going to go cold on that one.
Okay. That's fair. I honestly don't know. I'm grasping at straws here just to try to get something, give a little spark. So what do you got?
Man, it's so tough with free agency. Linebacker is going to be a position that I think that they're going to have to do something. I'm not exactly sure what it is they're going to have to do. I'm going to go Dre Greenlaw. Hot or cold?
It's a tough one. He's been through the Achilles. Obviously, that happened against this team. I wouldn't say that his performance last year was a direct recovery, quote unquote. But I do think it shows that there's still some tread on the tires. I just want to take a look real quick. It makes it tough to project him to be able to like walk in and do this. I don't even know if he recorded stats last year. I know that he got back to the point where he could play, but at that point, what is he? 5 years? 5 year? Yeah, he was a 5th round selection. This 5th year going in. Depending on the level of the contract, why not? He's a guy that I think can make some plays. I don't think that he's a drastic upgrade over what they've had. Certainly is somebody I think more comfortable in space in the pass attack. So I think that's probably something that they could do. I'd say lukewarm, not rather than hot.
Fair enough. Who's your next one?
There's too many, honestly, for me to get going. We'll talk tackles. So I'm omitting the tackles today, folks. We'll talk about those coming up. But when you look at the edge class in particular, just to try to give some boost, later in the week or next week, we will talk specifically about Charles Omenihu and his scenario, right? We're going to go through some of these veterans that are critical for their decisions, Joe Thuney being today, and obviously we will get to Charles. But when I look at the group there's some interesting options that maybe are, again, in a similar situation, guys coming off of craziness that could maybe do something, some re-education, some re-emergence. Hassan Reddick didn't want to play for the Jets this year, but he's a guy that can get after the quarterback. You bring him in on a light deal, which is probably not what he's looking for. I could live with that. I don't see that happening. So the guy that stands out to me is a total Brett Veach reclamation project who never really panned out. He's coming off of a deal with the Saints. Chase Young. He's only 26 years old. Do you try to give him a shot at a roster spot and see if he can recover?
I'm hot on that one. I think that would be a good chance. You take a chance on a guy that's had all the tools and it hasn't worked out so far. And it's possible it's not going to work out in Kansas City, obviously, but I don't think he's going to break the bank when it comes to contract. And edge is something you always need rushers. You always need good pass rushers. So I don't think I'm going to be curious, and I know this isn't the question, but I'm going to be curious what Charles Omenihu gets. Him coming off the injury, he didn't really have a great season. He was effective, but didn't really have the numbers that he would hope. So I can't imagine he's going to get a great deal. But I think he's still going to get less than probably a Chase Young would, just because of 1, the age, 2, the injury history this past year, and probably the pedigree, I guess you would say. I mean, he doesn't have the name that Chase Young does. And whether or not that's really valid and fair is probably not the case, but I would take a chance on Chase Young.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball. I don't know that I see them going this way, but it's curious to me because we felt like looking at this team and looking at this season, like when they finally got into the playoffs, you thought, okay, Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Worthy, you're going to have Justin Watson. You're going to have a receiver group, JuJu Smith-Schuster, that is going to be effective. And then in the Super Bowl, they weren't. And they really weren't in the playoffs. Like, that was what really surprised me. They just didn't have that effectiveness. So do you, knowing that you're going to probably lose Rashee Rice for 6 games, I have a two-parter, actually. Do you try to bring back a guy like JuJu Smith-Schuster on a small deal, knowing that he fits the system and what you want, and he can do a lot of what Rice does, especially early on in the season?
I will say yes, I'm hot on that because I don't think it'll cost nearly anything. What was he, 2.1 against the cap this year? So
something like that.
Yes, similar contract, similar role. I'm all good with JuJu coming back.
Yeah. 2, Chris Godwin.
It's a tough one. Godwin's 28. at that point.
29.
Sorry. Coming off of a $20 million per annum. That's tough. I can't see him taking what I would pay him, which would be in the 8 to 10 range because of the injury history. You can't trust him, especially when you know you're going to be without Rashee Rice for at least some period of time. You can't trust him to play 20 games. There's no way that I trust that guy to play a full slate in 2025. I just can't do it.
Well, and that's kind of also another reason why I said JuJu, because I do think that maybe you can look at those and say, okay, well, if you can get through the first 4 or 5 weeks with JuJu and Chris Godwin, and then you get Rashee Rice back at some point, that's better than where you're going to be. But yeah. I understand why you're saying probably not. I agree with you. I don't know that he's going to be somebody that the Chiefs can afford, and I can't imagine that he's going to get a cheap contract. Somebody's going to pay him.
I agree. I'll stay with the wide receiver position for my last one because this is going to hurt some people, but that's okay. The guy has made some plays against this team, and that's one of the things that I always look for in free agency. And he's only 26 years old. He'll be a cheap contract. He'd be a guy that will be in that fourth, fifth role, and I think has made enough plays to make me warrant putting him in this offense. How would you feel about trying to steal from the Chargers one Josh Palmer, hot or cold?
I actually really like that. I'm going to go hot. If he's willing to play for a cheap contract, and I'm not talking like cheap, I'm talking like, decent wide receiver, $3-4 million, whatever, that type of cheap contract. If he's willing to play for that, yeah, absolutely. I think that he can be a asset to this team. Is he going to be a burner, or is he going to be a guy that's going to go for 1,000 yards? No, but the Chiefs don't need guys that are going to go for 1,000 yards. They need competent receivers that can do specific things. And Andy Reid's system, I think Palmer can be that guy.
Yeah. And I see him as a younger version of what JuJu can fill in the gaps between what is eventually full-time Rice and full-time Xavier. I like that. So that's one guy that popped up to me as I was looking over the weekend as well. We'd love to know what you guys think, or anybody's pops up on your radar. Put it in the YouTube comments. Let us know. And we're going to continue to play this game as we go through all the hardcore decisions the team has to make about their free agents before we get to options outside of it. Any last thoughts from you on where we're at here?
No, I think that this is going to be an interesting 2 weeks for the Chiefs, 3 weeks for the Chiefs until free agency starts. You would hope that you're going to get information in the coming days, this coming week sometime, about Travis Kelce. You'd hope that he's not going to wait until, right before free agency starts. And maybe he's already told the team. Maybe it's just not come out yet. Who knows? We'll know. We'll let you know when we know. But the other part of it is that at this point you're working on trying to get deals done. Like, you're not going to get a deal done with a guy like Nick Bolton or Trey Smith once free agency opens. If you're going to get a deal done, it's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. I don't know that they're going to get a deal done with either of them. I don't know if either of them intend to try to get a deal done with Kansas City. They may both want to make get to the market. So it's going to be interesting. The Chiefs to come out and say they're not going to franchise tag anybody, which makes sense. There's not a player on here that's probably worth the franchise tag at their position. I love Trey Smith, but not at $25 million a year. So to me, it makes sense that they're sticking and not franchising anybody. And the other reality is you have to have the cap space to be able to do it, and they don't have that. Yeah. Basically, if they restructure Mahomes, they could get the $25 million to do it. But then you basically take all the money that you just saved restructuring Mahomes and tie it up in a franchise tag. And granted, maybe you're planning on trading him, but still don't think that's the right move.
That's fair. It's going to be interesting. That tag can be applied or pulled whenever they want. It'll be a volatile,
as long as it's not signed.
Right. So that is an option out there, and I agree it's a long shot at this point because of the cap space you have to have. But we're going to cover top 100 tomorrow, some tackle talk, and a little bit more hot and cold of what we like in the free agent pool, at least as it stands right now. So don't miss that. Make sure you like, sub, and hit the bell. Thanks for being with us. We always appreciate you when you guys ride through the offseason with us, because we are here no matter what for you all year long. Have a great day. Thanks for being with us today, and we will talk to you tomorrow